welcome. You're listening to the Just Love Them podcast. I'm your host, Cherie Best. Join me on a journey to understand and to find peace with those we love who've left their faith. As people share their experiences on this podcast, take away what resonates for you and what helps you in your life and for your situation. Today, I have joining me a special guest, Jessica Caswell. Jessica is a mom and a teacher working on her master's in education. She grew up in the Bible Belt in Texas, and she loves all her friends of other faiths. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you were willing to join me today, and I would love for you to just jump right in and tell us your story.
I grew up in Texas and I had six younger siblings. We always kind of had a mixed faith household, actually. I had a mom who would, take us to church every Sunday, and then we had a dad who'd kind of like, celebrate in different ways. It gave me an opportunity to kind of decide what I wanted to do, what I wanted my faith to be. I came out to Utah to go to school out here, and I've just kind of stayed out here ever since. It's been such an interesting journey just to see how different people express their religion, honestly.
It is because there's so many different ways that people express their religions.
Yeah. When I got married, my husband at the time, his family had been members of their church for a really long time, but they had all kind of struggled. And in some ways, it was difficult to relate to them because they just had different routines, different structures that they would do. And there was a little bit of apprehension in the beginning for me, just because some of them had already left the church. Me coming in there, as someone who was like showing up to church every Sunday, reading scriptures every day, like doing the things that I was accustomed to doing, and coming into a family where there were a lot of people who that was not their practice, and learning how to love them.
And so was your husband more like you, like he wanted to do the things you've just described, going to church every week and all of that, or was he more leaning toward where some of his family was?
Well, in the beginning, I had kind of thought we were on the same page. Very quickly after getting married, I saw less and less that we were on the same page, and that he was kind of going back to how some of his other family members were. And so there were a lot of times that I would go and worship alone.
Hmm.
Um, and it was kind of a surprise because I really had thought it was different than that.
You thought he was going to stay in the same space that you were in and that you were more equally yoked in that way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was hard sometimes, and being a Latter-day Saint, we put a lot of value on going to the temple. And that's kind of like something we do in the middle of the week versus just on Sundays. And so I would show up once a week or once every other week, and I would have to go by myself, which was hard because a lot of times they put a lot of focus on your relationship with your significant other and your family. And I would just have to sit there like, okay, well, this is really different than I thought, but
Yeah.
I'm still going to show up.
That must have been really hard.
It was really hard for a while. I think people grieve in so many different ways. They go through all the different stages and they're not linear. You might be feeling just totally depressed one day, and maybe the next day you feel angry, and maybe the next day you're back to just, what can I do? This must be my fault. Like there's so many different things that people go through. They'll blame themselves when really there's so little control that you have over what somebody else is doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You only get to pick for you, right? Wow. And so then what happened, or how did you handle that? What changed for you?
Well, I tried it the hard way first, honestly. I tried the bargain, I tried to guilt trip, like I tried all the things that were not healthy. And
Uh-huh.
surprise, none of them worked.
That's a shock.
Oh my gosh. we had this house and it was on the corner lot, and whoever lived there before us had planted all these beautiful fruit trees. And so there were apple trees and cherry trees and this beautiful grapevine. Like it was just heavenly. And so my kids and I would just spend a lot of time out there. And I was standing outside in front of the apple tree one day and I thought, like you always think of the metaphor of an apple. The exterior of the apple is what everybody sees on the outside, but you don't know what's on the inside. You don't know what's in the heart of somebody. We don't get to see that. God knows all of our hearts. He knows what's in there. And I was standing there in front of this apple tree and just wondering, like, oh, I wonder which apple represents me. I wonder which apple represents my husband. I just was sitting there thinking, and as I was standing there pondering, I had this thought, and I don't think it was my own. And it was, if you let go, if you let him go, he will heal. And I was like, oh, hadn't tried that before. And, I say that a little facetiously, but really, I had kind of worn myself out trying to get this other person on the same page with me, and it just wasn't working. And I realized, oh my gosh, maybe I'm the one standing in the way. It wasn't what I planned for my life, but I ended up spending some time with my family back in Texas, and I was out there for about a year just trying to, figure out the future, figure out what we needed to do. And we did end up getting divorced. It actually kind of ended up being a really healthy thing. And since that point, he has now gone on and he goes to church with his new family. He's involved in the church. He takes my kids to church when they're with him now. And it's all kind of been this 360. Before there was so much contention and conflict, and now things have kind of turned around. Even some other members of his family have turned around. That I don't know if that was independently or together. Like I don't really know the whole story there, but like he had a brother who used to have a big problem with smoking, and he got to the point where he was able to change what he was doing and started taking his family to church, quit smoking, and got all sealed in the temple. I love to see how things turn around, and I don't really get to talk to them very much. I just kind of love them from afar now because I'm not part of that family anymore, but I still see the progress that they're making.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story, and so interesting that you actually received inspiration that you needed to let go. It's just not what you would normally expect, right? You would think the inspiration would be try harder, do
Right.
this, do that, but your inspiration was let go.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you let go, he will heal.
If you let go, he will heal.
Yeah.
Just tells you like how much God is in charge and not us, right? Like we don't get to manipulate and make things happen the way we want, the way we envision.
So it was so eye-opening for sure.
Absolutely. So what have you learned or what insight do you have and where are you at now?
I really think it's helped me a lot with my other friendships and my other relationships. I've watched the long game happen. And I think that's the thing. I think God is really into playing a very long game with all of us. None of us are perfect, or maybe we wouldn't be here.
Right.
And I look at my other friends who are struggling and I think, okay, well, this is where they are in this moment right here. But that doesn't have to be where they're going to be tomorrow. Tomorrow they might be somewhere completely different, and they all have the capacity to change and make a different choice. And sometimes it's them going down these different roads. I think that sometimes it's needed for them. Like sometimes you can't go in a straight line from point A to B. Sometimes you have to go from A to C to B. And sometimes that is the shortest line for somebody.
Yeah.
For them to figure out it truly in their heart what matters to them. We had talked previously. I have a friend who left the church when he was probably 17. Things were very difficult in their family, and he just wanted out of the whole thing and took to church with it. But I tell you, that is one of my very best friends. And if I had just like, oh, well, you're not part of my religion anymore, like if I had been like that, I would have missed out on so many things. I think a common misconception people have is just because you leave the church, that means you don't love God anymore or something. And it's not true. And it doesn't make them bad people. It doesn't, it just means, okay, well, they're figuring something out. In my friend's case, there were a lot of misconceptions that he had, and we've had a lot of long conversations about what he had heard or what his parents had said about our religion and how things actually were. And so some things we've actually been able to clear up as we're talking about them. Some things I think he'll probably wonder about for a long time. We all kind of have questions.
Hmm.
And some of us take those questions and we ponder them while we're still in our faith. And some people take those questions and they kind of step outside the faith while they figure them out.
It's really well said. I love that you verbalized it that way because that's exactly what we see. I find it very interesting that as you're talking about your friend who you've given so much grace to, and you just love that person for who they are, not for what they're doing or what they're thinking, but that it's okay. You allow space for someone else to be who they are. And I find it really interesting that with your husband, you were able to do that as well. Like as you're talking, I can tell you don't have resentment in your voice, you don't have victim mentality. You seem to have really found peace. And I'm wondering, how did you get to that place?
I think that is an act of grace. I think it is a miracle of its own, honestly. For me, I think the big turning point, well, there were a couple, but a big turning point was I started attending these addiction recovery classes because I wanted to fix my husband. I thought, well, if I go to these, maybe he'll go, and
Right.
that was totally the wrong headspace to be in. And I can laugh about it now, but it got me, it got me to show up and it got me to learn some principles. They go over basically, it's like a faith-based version of the 12 steps of addiction recovery. And lots of people do it, lots of denominations, they kind of handle it a little bit differently. But in our church, they were very clear about how God is your higher power and he's the person you need to turn to when nothing else is working. And I was so fed up. I mean, I was so stressed out at the time. I was maybe getting 2 hours of sleep at night and I had 2-year-old at home.
Oh, wow.
It was so hard. And I was so fed up. I was like, you want me to trust you, God? Okay. You know what? I'm going to give you 2 weeks. I'm going to do whatever you tell me to do. And okay, maybe that was snarky of me. That's just where it was at the time.
I
But
think
it
God's
worked
so
for me.
patient with us
I'm
wherever
not
we're
going to say
at.
I'm perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it got me where I needed to go. And I think that's what mattered because I took it and I ran with it and I went home and all of the weight, all of the heaviness, everything that I'd been carrying in my heart, I felt so betrayed. All of that was just gone. I was not carrying it anymore.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you had this experience where you just told God he had 2 weeks and then it was just gone? Or what happened in the middle between
Oh,
saying
this
that
happened
and
that very day. This was the very night that I went to the meeting. The very night on the way home, I just felt so light all the way home. Like
wow.
I felt like I was dancing in the clouds. I came home. I was like, I didn't even worry about what he was doing. I didn't even worry. And I thought, I'm going to celebrate being with my kids. I'm going to celebrate feeling close to Jesus. I'm just going to, that just became my world. I was so joyful. It was like we jumped on the bed. We had a party. It was great. And my kids were little, so they appreciated that, and I felt returned to myself. I felt like who I was that had been like just buried under so much stress came back to life again, who I was. And I wasn't going to let that go.
It's like you offered to give it to God and he's like, "Yes, I'll take that." And he took it immediately, it sounds like.
Immediately. He didn't wait 2 weeks.
Oh, what a tender mercy. And so after that, were you able to hold on to that or how did it go after that?
I honestly think I was given a glimpse because it didn't make every day easy after that, but it did give me something to look at. Like, oh my gosh, I am somebody worth loving. I am somebody worth protecting. I am worth getting to a good place. And I know who's going to get me there.
Because really, in the end, the Savior's the one that's already paid for all our pain. Everything that makes us hurt inside, He's already paid for it. Ultimately, the healing that takes place is when God steps in and takes it.
Absolutely. And you can translate that to everybody around you. Like, oh my gosh, if God loves me this much, he could take my snarky little self and just show me so much love in that moment. Don't you think he loves my husband that much too? Don't you think he loves this person over here that much too? Like it's overwhelming to think about it. Like if you really stop to think about it, it's just gigantic.
Wow, that is such beautiful perspective. When you look at people that way, the way God's looking at you, it just makes a huge difference.
Makes a huge difference. I mean, it doesn't mean that people are never going to do something bad or hurt your feelings, like
Oh, because they are.
because we do all the time.
Yeah.
We do it to each other, and we're still learning. But he takes it anyway. He takes this, and I think that's the thing is, if he can be patient with me and my imperfections, am I so much better than somebody who stepped out for a minute? I don't think so.
I love that perspective. That's great. Any other things you would like to share? Any other insights?
Well, there was this funny time when, so my friend who had left the church, there was this one time I actually had to give a talk in church, and they'll just pick people like, hey, would you like to come share something, And I was like, okay, I'll come share a thought, 10, 15 minutes. Sure, I'll come up, sometimes it's kind of nerve-wracking. And so I called my friend because we would have a lot of religious discussions, and I was like, well, I feel like I need to talk about living water. And it's kind of an abstract concept. And, it's kind of like this vague thing. And he's like, oh, I can tell you exactly what that means. And he shared a perspective about like you're in a boat on the river and there's rocks, there's different things. And it's kind of like an allegory for your life. He shared the perspective that living water is kind of like God's guiding the water. You might not control all of the hazards or the rocks or the things that are in there, but you're in the boat and God's the water moving you down this path where it's going to take you, and he's watching over where it is going to take you. I thought it was really amazing to listen to a different perspective. It actually helped me think about it in a different way. When I went to church and I shared some of his thoughts that he had shared with me, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, I love the boat story. That was so awesome. Like that's so great. And I told my friend, and he's like, well, did you tell them you got this from somebody who left the church? And I'm just like, and I don't see him that way. It's not how our conversations go. Oh, well, you're in this box over here. So that means that I don't have to listen to what you have to say, but it's like, I don't know how many people like benefited. You don't know what people are going through. God is in charge of their river,
Mm-hmm.
and you can like do what you feel prompted to do and let go so that
And it,
you can receive the healing that you need for you.
Absolutely. And as you were telling that boat story and about your friend who'd left the church who gave you that idea, I was thinking about what you said earlier about the apples on the tree and how we just see the outside of the apple. I thought that was so profound when you shared that. And you have no idea what's really inside. You don't know what's in the heart of that apple. You don't know what's in the heart of that person. You only see what's visible on the outside. And I thought that's exactly like what your friend, somebody wouldn't have any idea what is inside of him, what he's thinking, what his relationship with God is. We just see the outside. And that's why it's so important to give everyone grace, like you said, and just love everyone because God's in charge and he's moving us down the river and he knows what's in our hearts. And
Yeah,
he's the only one who really knows what's in our hearts.
absolutely.
So beautiful. Jessica, thank you so much for being here with me today. I feel like what you've shared has been so valuable. It's definitely given me some things to think about, especially with the apple analogy and the boat analogy. Just beautiful things to think about how to love people better and about how to just accept them and let them go and allow them to be who they are and what they are and allow God to work in their lives. And we're just the support people. We just do what God instructs us to do, and we do what we feel prompted. And sometimes that's to let go. Thank you for your example and for sharing that.
I think it also makes me think about how God is a God of restoration. He loves to take people out and bring them back. How many stories in the scriptures are about that very thing?
Oh, that is such a good point. Just because it's what you see right now doesn't mean it will always be that way. God restores.
Yeah,
Love that.
he loves to do that.
Yes, he does. And he does it with everybody. If I think about my own life, he does that with me over and over and over. So beautiful. Well, thank you for being here. And listeners, thank you for being here. I am now on YouTube. So, for those of you wonderful listeners who always rate and review my podcasts, I love it. And I have this new platform, YouTube. I'm still working on my search engine, so I'm not that easy to find. But if you would help me, if you would go on to YouTube and type in Cherie Best, Just Love Them podcast, because you have to type that whole thing in because I'm new on there to find that. And then if you'll go in and subscribe and rate and review that, that would help me a tremendous amount to help get this podcast out to those who are struggling with their loved ones leaving the faith so that we can all link arms together, support each other, learn and grow from each other. Join me again next time for another episode of Just Love Them.